And now, a Scared for Reals Extra.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry.
All right, a cult classic spaghetti western, if you will, was released this month, back in 1966. No, it's not The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And it was directed by a Sergio, but not Sergio Leone, and even Tarantino jokes, the second best Sergio in Italian westerns. We're talking about Sergio Corbucci's Django. And I know Tarantino famously did Django Unchained, but this is the first original Django film, and it was fresh off of Sergio Leone's Fistful of Dollars, and it was a huge worldwide phenomenon. So much so that every Italian, European-produced Western, they threw Django in the title somehow. So if you look online, Adam, I'm sure you'll come across a lot of Django movies. Mm-hmm. They're not really Django movies. There's like two movies that Sergio Corbucci's involved with that actually have the word or the real Django in there.
Right.
There was a sequel kind of made, but it wasn't really a dead-on sequel, but Terence Hill portrayed Django instead of Franco Nero. Mm-hmm. But Franco Nero, Sergio Corbucci, this is the first Django film. And like Fistful of Dollars, but Sergio Corbucci was a little more subtle with his homage to Kurosawa's Yojimbo. Remember how I discussed that Fistful of Dollars pretty much ripped most of the plot off of Yojimbo?
Yeah.
Almost, obviously changed some names, did a few different things with the plot. Sergio Corbucci was a little more subtle with his Yojimbo remake. It wasn't a flat out, there are certain similarities, but it wasn't, you couldn't take Sergio Corbucci to court saying you plagiarized because it's a completely different film.
Right.
But he pays homage, just like Fistful of Dollars and Yojimbo. He pits two sides against each other, but it's more of him versus these two sides, taking on both sides. Mm-hmm. And it's noted that Sergio Corbucci grew up at a time when Italy was under fascism, dealing with Mussolini, and he literally, his dad was part of the fascism movement, but only because he had to for survival. Mm-hmm. Like, there are some memoirs where Corbucci would say that his dad come home, take off his fascism attire and throw it in the corner.
Oh wow!
He just didn't enjoy it. He just kind of, put on a good show, facade, mm-hmm. if you will. And he even sang in a choir, literally a few steps away from Mussolini and Hitler themselves. Mm-hmm. So just imagine being right in front of these two dictators.
Yeah.
So that, you look at all of Sergio Corbucci's work, even following Django, there's a lot of pessimism in there, and it's very bleak. Mm-hmm. And a major character in the original Django that you'll note is mud.
Yeah.
It's literally a town of mud. So talk about the plot a little bit. We don't really need to make a huge deal about the plot because it's been discussed so many times, but it's, he's like a former soldier and comes back to this town for mysterious reasons. And he's got a coffin. He's dragging a coffin. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you haven't seen the movie, Adam, but I'm sure you've seen references to that where he's carrying a coffin around. Robert Rodriguez pays homage to, Django as well, with the machine guns. Because you literally got a machine gun inside that coffin.
Right, yeah.
So a very memorable sequence that's been kind of imitated millions of times. But this is the original. And referenced in over 30 sequels from the time of the film's release until the early 70s. This is the height of the spaghetti western craze over in Europe, and it would fade out by like the mid 70s. Mm-hmm. So you got a good 10-year period where it was like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of movies, and even in Italy, if it wasn't called something else, elsewhere they would put just Django in the title somehow.
Right.
even though there is no character named Django in the movie.
It's, the Chinese cinema kind of did the same thing with Bruce Lee. Just put Bruce Lee everywhere.
The Bruce-ploitation, yes, I remember that craze. Bruce Lee, L-E, you know.
Yep.
I remember all of that. So it's actually one of the most violent films made at the time.
Mm-hmm.
If you do look into it, this movie wasn't released in England until 1993.
Wow.
Like 25 years after it was released.
Well, England also had the whole video nasties thing that you couldn't get movies like these. And in Canada as well, like censorship was just so out of control. I know I occasionally will listen to the pro wrestler Chris Jericho's podcast, Talk is Jericho, and he's a big horror fan, and he's often referencing growing up how he didn't see like standard classic slasher horror movies until he was in his late 20s, early 30s when he was wrestling down in the States because they weren't available in Canada or over in England because they were just the censorship.
Well, even in America, I mean, growing up, going to the video store, I'd see tons and tons of the slasher films that I know you loved a lot, and I liked them to a certain degree. But as far as like foreign films were concerned, I think there was Django just because of how popular it was.
Yeah.
There was Leone films. They're all dubbed in English. There was no Italian audio option like there is now, which is great.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Because you get to hear Franco Nero's voice in the Italian track. And
there's only so much we could do with VHS. Chris.
Right. Oh, I know. I'm just saying people who complain about video today, it was rough for us growing up. We had VHS tapes. What you had was what you had. There was no deluxe editions. And if you wanted to buy a brand new VHS in the 80s, $100.
Yeah.
Getting back to Django, again, I don't want to focus too much on the plot, but he is a soldier turned drifter. He becomes embroiled in this bitter, destructive feud. There's these Confederate red shirts. They're almost like the Ku Klux Klan, if you will. You kind of get the idea that they would have done this to any race.
Yeah.
Because the Ku Klux Klan, which were run by Democrats, they were against any race. Mm-hmm. So instead of white, they have red hoods. And I'll get to that later on to why they were actually wearing hoods. There was a reason for it. And then you had these Mexican revolutionaries, these bandits, if you will. Two different sides. The Confederates wanted to, they literally, for fun, they'd have a Mexican go running and then they shoot the Mexican, see how far they could run before the guy could lose focus. And that was just what they did for fun. That's the beginning of the movie. That's your introduction to the Confederate red shirts. And again, very violent, very brutal. You see an ear being cut off and shoved in a guy's mouth. And you see hands getting crushed to a bloody pulp. Mm-hmm. A woman, her back getting whipped several times. And so there's a lot of violence on here, a lot of violence in there. But the main bad guy, if you will, is this Major Jackson guy who runs the Confederate redcoats and red hoods, whatever you want to call them. Did this guy wrong Django in the past? Because there is a woman's grave that he's visiting at the beginning of the movie. What is that woman to him? Was it a former lover? Tarantino, there's this interesting documentary that they basically interviewed Tarantino for 90 minutes about Sergio Corbucci. And his theory is that he fought on the North Side. One of the guys he fought with, his dying wish was to pay respects to his wife. He comes back, his wife is dead, and he kind of gets his own revenge, if you will. They don't make it clear, which is kind of cool. I like mysterioisms of these movies, where you don't know the plot, the background of the main character. He's just in there, he's mysterious. That gives a lot of interest to the character. That's the thing, like, this movie was made to kind of rival Fistful of Dollars, but in all actuality, Leone and Corbucci worked together on these Roman epic movies,
Yeah.
I mean, they worked together as assistant directors, and that's how they got these directing gigs. Leone's first movie was an epic swords and sandal movie, where Corbucci was more interested in remaking an American Western and make like exactly the way Hollywood made it. So his first couple of movies were, Minnesota Clay, which is, again, like a Hollywood Western. It's a traditional Hollywood Western. It's not a graphic, violent movie. But Django Fistful of Dollars came about, and no one had ever seen a movie like that before, so they wanted those type of movies. Fistful of Dollars was huge, so let's keep making those kind of movies.
Right.
So along comes Django, and that's a huge success. I think it even did better at the time than Leone's Fistful of Dollars.
Oh, wow.
Whereas Leone wanted to become more artistic, and Corbucci just reveled and enjoyed doing genre movies. Mm-hmm. He just liked to do them. When the spaghetti Western craze faded out in the 80s, he started doing those screwball comedies that were popping up all over the place in the 80s. Mm-hmm. They were kind of popular for a little time. He went with the flow, know. But he made some good stuff in there. And this is kind of like an unofficial start of a trilogy for Sergio Corbucci. It's called the Mud and Blood trilogy. Django was first, and then if you want to watch probably one of the bleakest westerns you'll ever see, and I know you're not a huge fan of westerns, Adam, but these type of westerns are not your traditional ones, and I think you'd enjoy those more. Mm-hmm. But let's put it this way: The Great Silence is very, very depressing.
Yeah.
But again, there's the fascism thing that runs through all of his movies.
Right.
Rebelling against, all these revolutionary things that are always in his movies. Mm-hmm. And the third one was The Specialist, which is all about a revolution.
Yeah.
So yeah, both Leone and Corbucci grew up during the time when Italy was under fascism. That's just the way it was. And Leone kind of made a couple movies that hinted at the fascism where Corbucci seemed to revel in it.
Yeah.
It's like these heroes, if you will, are not really like heroes. They're like the anti-heroes, but they have these superhuman powers in a way. Mm-hmm. Django's great with a gun, but he always did something to those main characters to cripple them, to take away their superhero powers, and then they have to come back and prove it in the end. Right. Then they're the true heroes.
Yeah.
So Django, he kind of knows the head of this Mexican revolutionary, the head bandit there, and they try to steal the Confederates' gold. So they come up with an elaborate plan. They steal the gold. Django wants only some of it. The guy really here, I'll hold it for you, and I don't want you to hold it for me. I want my cut now. And so he sets up a plan, steals all of the gold from the Mexican revolutionaries, and of course that, he saved this guy's life a couple times. You don't know what he did to save the guy's life, but there's a past, and they kind of hint of a past with the Major Jackson, the guy, the head of the Confederates as well. But you don't know too much about that stuff. So he steals the gold, and it disappears in quicksand because he sets up a plan where the machine gun goes off and, as a distraction so he can leave. So the machine gun stays behind, burns in this barn fire as they steal the wagon, and the coffin, inside the coffin now, instead of the machine gun, there's all the gold.
Yeah.
But the horse kind of makes a mistake. The coffin falls into the quicksand. Django tries to grab it, misses out on it, and there's the gold. But then what happens, he's pulled out of the quicksand, but they crush his hands. Like literally, they take the butt end of a rifle, like 2 or 3 guys just bash his hands to a bloody pulp. So he literally can't use his hands anymore. Mm-hmm. And in the midst of all this, there's the woman I mentioned that got whipped at the beginning of the movie. She becomes like I don't know if love interest is the right word. Her name is Maria. That's a generic name in these Westerns. But Maria, he rescues her. She belongs to the Mexican revolutionaries, and the Confederate guys don't like that. They think she's a traitor because she went with them. She was kind of like had no choice,
Right.
The Mexican revolutionaries think she's their property.
Yeah.
So they try to rape her, whip her. There's a little sadism in there. Mm-hmm. Get a little sadism in these Westerns from time to time.
Right.
So there's that at the beginning. Django rescues her, so she feels close to Django, and she even says it feels good to be next to a real man. But later on in the movie, when she's back with the Mexican revolutionaries, he's like, do what you want with her. She's not mine. I'm not interested in her. And she's kind of taken aback. Mm-hmm. And he kind of reveals that I've already been in love once and it'll never happen again. So, which kind of hints that the woman that he meets at the beginning at the graveside may be his wife or something.
Right.
You just don't know, but he did love somebody once. Mm-hmm. Something happened. He doesn't want to get close to anyone again because he thinks they'll die too. So, and she almost does die, actually.
Yeah.
Like Maria actually was trying to rescue Django from the quicksand after he's trying to get the gold back. Mm-hmm. She gets shot in the back by the Mexican revolutionaries, and they pull him out and they crush his hands. He somehow miraculously carries her back to the bar, which has kind of been called by the revolutionaries and the Confederates as like neutral territory.
Yeah.
So she kind of lays there, and she doesn't die, but nothing happens, and it doesn't go back to her at the end. Because Django's got to have that one final showdown with Major Jackson and the rest of the Confederates. The ones he didn't kill in that wicked machine gun blast in the middle of the movie. So, and I might add that final scene in the graveyard, he can't use his hands. So he literally takes his pistol apart, kind of sets it up. So Major Jackson comes down and with his Confederates, and he tries to do the sign of the Holy Cross, in the name of the Father, the Son, and then he goes, Amen, kills all the guys. Django walks away, kind of limps away, and that's how the movie ends. You see the close-up of the gun and all the blood around it because of all of his hand.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not like a ride off into the sunset kind of Western that,
Not really a make you feel good ending.
No.
Yeah.
So he lives, and so does Maria. You don't see her die. So does he go back to her? We'll never know. Because they did make one as I mentioned, Franco Nero revisited the character one more time in 1987. And he even said that was a foolish thing for me to do. He goes, I was stupid. And I guess Corbucci, I think he produced the movie. I don't know if he directed it or not, but he was involved with the movie, and it just, no one talks about that movie,
right?
But everyone talks about this movie, that's for sure. Yeah, good stuff. And the reason, this is interesting, the assistant director of this movie noted how they all were wearing red hoods. That's because without the red hoods, the extras that they were presented with worked on Pasolini's movies. Mm-hmm. You've heard of Pasolini, the filmmaker. So a lot of these extras had no teeth, and they didn't look scary enough. So the assistant director had a solution. Let's have them wear red masks, red hoods. So
gotcha.
So I mean, it was actually a stroke of genius because it made them kind of resemble the KKK a little bit, and
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's not like, I wouldn't rate it as high as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly or anything like that. But this movie, I revisit it so many times, and it's special. It's fun to watch. It's not as good as Leone's movies. That's why it's funny where Tarantino's like the second best Sergio, because he even alludes to it in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with DiCaprio's character. Right. Oh, Sergio Leone? No, the second best Sergio. It's a great film. It's got a huge cult following, and even Tarantino made Django Unchained. And you said you've seen pieces of that movie.
Yeah, pieces of that.
What parts did you watch?
Oh, boy. It's been a minute.
It's been 12 years.
It's been 12 years. Yeah, and parts I saw when it first came out. I honestly can't remember.
Well,
I won't lie.
Well, there is a sequence where DiCaprio is introduced for the first time.
Yeah.
Jamie Foxx and Christoph Waltz, they're both going into this place where you see these two wrestlers beating the heck out of each other. I don't know if you remember that sequence. Yeah, I remember
seeing that, yep.
There's a guy off into the distance. It's all in all of the previews. What's your name? Django. How do you spell it? The guy asks. D-J-A-N-G-O. Django. The D is silent. And then the other guy goes, I know. That's Franco Nero.
Oh, cool.
He has a little cameo in it. And he had an interesting run in Hollywood. He was in some Hollywood movies, but usually the villain.
Yeah.
But Franco Nero has had a lot of acclaim, and most recently he was in The Pope's Exorcist. Mm-hmm. He was the Pope,
Cool.
So, I mean, he's still out there acting. The guy's close to 80, and I know they were talking about making a third Django, and he said, it's funny, the interview back in 2018, he said he made a stupid choice by revisiting Django. He said he'd do Django again. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if they're going to make a third Django. I mean, if they do, they like the fifth Indiana Jones movie, they better hurry up. I mean, the guy's old.
I guess it's the old saying, never say never.
Right.
I mean,
literally, never say never again, Connery.
Yeah. I mean, seriously. I mean, like, throughout the most of the 2000s and the 90s, Michael Keaton did everything he could to stay away from Batman, and now it's all he talks about. And he did one movie and then a second movie that's never going to be released, and so it's like you never say never. You know?
Right. And we can't talk about Django without talking about the soundtrack. It's so iconic, that theme song. You've heard it before.
Yep.
Louis Bacalov, he actually worked on Pasolini. He did the music for the Gospel According to St. Matthew. It was his first Western, and of course, after that one, how successful it was, boom, within several months, he was booked for scoring other Westerns.
Yeah.
He did the Bullet for the General, which is probably one of the more famous spaghetti Westerns. There's Leone's, there's Corbucci's, and then there's, Bullet for the General, which he actually, believe it or not, reused several themes from his Django score.
Oh, wow. And
Tarantino used a lot of the Django score as well for his movie. It's just so iconic. So, again, if you haven't seen Django yet, you got to see it. I mean, if you only have seen Tarantino's Django, I mean, you're missing out. Because I was fortunate. I used to have the Blue Underground DVD years and years ago. Mm-hmm. Then Arrow came out with a 4K and a Blu-ray Steelbook. I got the Blu-ray Steelbook because at the time I didn't have a 4K player. But the Blu-ray has Texas Adios, which is Nero immediately started working on that right after Django. Oh, wow. And again, it was called Django something else across the rest of the world, but in Italy it was Texas Adios.
Yeah.
Yeah, Django's not even a character in that movie, but it's Franco Nero. Let's put Django in there,
right?
Even though there is no Django in the movie. It's a completely different character. Mm-hmm. But, European...
We're making a martial arts movie. Let's call it Bruce Lee.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's what they did. They redubbed it, and the character was named Django. And But it was so iconic, and, I mean, the home media... I mean, there's just so many because, like, as I said, Blue Underground, the one I had, was 21 years ago now. They had a mildly damaged transfer to it, and Arrow came out, had an awesome remastered edition, of course, 4K and everything like that. Argent Films over in the UK released Django on DVD in 2004. Most recently, I mentioned Arrow. They also did another remaster in 2020, so they did a couple of different remasters. But just recently, Cult Films released a 4K of their own, which actually has a newer 4K master than what Arrow used back in 2018. So, I mean, there's a lot of options out there. If you want to watch Django, it's easy on home video to just buy a Blu-ray, a DVD, or something like that. I mean, if you don't collect, I know you tried to dig around for the streaming platforms. You had a hard time with that, huh?
Yeah, I couldn't find it.
I know Arrow had it on their streaming platform for a while, but again, I'm a physical media guy. I'm always going to advocate physical media over streaming because the quality is better.
Yeah, I mean, I like physical media just as much, but honestly, it's just convenient right now, especially, with so many movies we need to, we're watching right now for the show and stuff like that. It's easier just to Roku search and try to find something.
Well, thankfully, I have a good chunk of these movies already, Adam, so I'm okay. The cost of physical media is very high. There are contests that you can partake in that a lot of these labels and some of these YouTubers and influencers do, which you can get some stuff for free, which I've been fortunate enough, but spending money on this stuff, it's hard sometimes, but look for sales. Django has never looked better. Watching all of that mud. I mean, that mud is a character in itself, Adam.
Yeah.
Franco Nero and Django also starring Mud, because Mud is such a prominent character in Django. So I can't recommend it enough. It's not a perfect movie, but man, oh man, it's just one movie that's fun to revisit over and over again. So Django, again, you have your options of Arrow, Blue Underground, or whatever. Just make sure, get a hold of Django. And if you've seen Django and you love it or hated it, either way, just comment below. Again, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram. Let us know what you think.
We'll see you next time on Scared for Reals.